I'm Megan Beyer. I'm the Director of Art in Embassies. And this session will be on Art for Change, addressing sustainability through visual arts. And our moderator is João Mourão, who will be coming to the stage and leading us through a conversation about how artists can impact our environment in so many ways. Thanks so much, Joe.
Sorry. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Art and Embassies, to invite us to be here today. It's with great pleasure here. We're going to talk a bit about sustainability in the arts, and we've been thinking about sustainability as the ability to meet our current needs without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet theirs. In practice, sustainability is a development based on 5 principles: quality of life, justice and equity, participation, respect for the environment and its limits, and thinking and acting about the future without compromising it. In this scenario, and thinking how it could affect every element of the society in which we live, it's important to understand the role of art in sustainable practices and what role the various actors and the agents can play within this role of art in sustainable practice, sorry for my English. And what is the role of sustainability in the art? So with me today I have 3 amazing artists, Fernanda Fragateiro, Diana Policarpo, and they're going to present a bit of their work. Some of them will present just one piece, some of them will develop a bit more on their work. And we're going to start with Fernanda. So Fernanda, the stage is yours. Most of you know Fernanda. Fernanda is a Lisbon-based artist. She's a sculptor mainly, and she has been working a lot also with landscape and a lot with the ideas of modernism. So she's going to present a specific project today. So Fernanda, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello. I also will need a little help to show one of the pieces I chose to show you, so I will move. Also, after all these amazing artists and communicators that talk before me, I need a little help from a small text. So I start with just a phrase, a quote that says, "The land suddenly is too valid for social use." And I leave this in the air, and then I'll start talking about the work that I chose. Like in my practice, I have done many projects for urban space and landscape, and I work in collaboration with architects and landscape architects and educators. And in these interventions, there is always a commitment to contribute to what is common and a desire to build spaces of freedom. But this time, I'm not going to show the works I did for the urban and the landscape, because we have Myelin here, and she could, of course, show very interesting projects. But thinking about this meeting and how artists can address critical and social issues, and how can we take an active part in social improvement and social justice, I chose to show you a project that means a lot to me. It was born as an homage to Bairro 6 de Maio, a self-built favela in the metropolitan area of Lisbon, where for more than 40 years, a big community of immigrants from Cabo Verde build their homes and live their lives. So the first image I'm showing you is an image of Bairro 6 de Maio. My relation with Bairro 6 de Maio began in early 2018 during a violent demolition of this neighborhood. The demolition started before, in 2017, in articulation with a relocation program that dispersed a big community of more than 600 people, leaving many of them without a place to live. However, it was only in 2018, on my way to an art studio to work with a friend, and after getting lost, that I accidentally walked into this neighborhood that was totally unknown for me. From the road, I could see a place with a raw, handcrafted urbanism, with houses taken down by bulldozers machines. The space was protected by a large police contingent, and it was impossible for me to get closer and to know what was going on. To witness this violent demolition had a great impact on me. What was considered legal, the demolition of this favela, seemed totally illegal to me. And to see a process of demolition and transformation of the dwellings where people live, to see walls pulverized into thousands of fragments, ruins that reveal the beautiful colors of the interiors and making public what was private, and turning into ruins the houses where people still lived, this experience transformed me forever, and I couldn't walk from this without doing nothing. At the exactly time where I experienced this demolition, I was preparing an exhibition for the Sculpture Museum in Santo Tirso, in the north of Portugal, a beautiful building designed by architects Álvaro Cisa Vieira and Eduardo Soto de Moura. The Sculpture Museum happened to be connected with the archaeological nucleus of another city museum in the same area. And it was supposed that my exhibition also expands to this archaeological nucleus. So it became clear that I should use the production money to make my exhibition and to use it to make a work in homage to Bairro 6 de Maio as a way to preserve materials and memories and as a way to preserve something about the people who had never the right to be part of history. It was a long process of talking with several people from the community, collecting materials, documents, stories, looking for photos, films, texts, sounds, fragments of walls, all at the same time. I was collecting these materials and the neighborhood was being demolished, house after house after house, until it totally disappeared. This process was quite intense and painful. This image shows the museum or archaeological museum. So the piece was installed in one room, and then from that room you could see the remains of the archaeological museum. It was also painful to go through the archives of the media and to see the racism and paternalism that was portrayed in the national television during decades when they talk about Bairro 6 de Maio and many other neighborhoods like Bairro 6 de Maio, where fragile communities, most of them coming from Africa, were build their houses the way they could. And also was painful to see that in television, when they talk about these neighborhoods, there was all about violence and crime was the only topics. And from my experience by talking with the people that live in the barrio when I was doing my work, and people that used to live many years before, there were so many stories of life, normal life of kids, learning, of parties, of sharing a lot of things in the community that I couldn't understand why in national television the only thing they could mention was drug dealers, crimes, and so in this process, I made a lot of friends, and I hope I can be involved in the construction of a new school for the Centro Social 6 de Maio, that is the only building that still remains in place. Back to the sculpture. What you see in the image is a series of materials that came out of the process. You know, a tubular construction that you use as support when you're doing new buildings, but this time used to have masonry fragments suspended. There's a lot of voids in the sculpture, and the voids are important because they mark the absence. More examples of the fragments. But other materials were part of the sculpture. Books, sound pieces that some of them testimony the brutal police intervention in the neighborhood and the resistance of the residents. Films that show the action of an activist group for the defense of housing in Portugal, Habita, with whom I work very closely. So the films will show Habita members, like very young people, most of them, in action, trying to stop the demolitions. So this project gets together many stories of solidarity that were done by many people. The piece also contains objects donated by some residents. Not all the objects are part of the sculpture, but they are part of an archive of photos, of films that are available to the public through the site of the Museum of Santo Tirso. So some of the objects that were donated to me was like musical instruments, video clips by a musician, Baby Dog, academic thesis about periphery as a symptom or poverty and racism by Rita Lopes Alves. And all these documents are inside these dossiers with these pink, green, yellow, and gray colors that are the dossiers used by the town hall to put the documents, to archive documents. So when the sculpture is on view to the public can open these dossiers and read and look to photos, to documents, to letters written by peoples of the neighborhood when they apply to have like electricity in the neighborhood, etc., etc. Some of the documents. It was with Lisbon-based activist group Habita that I just mentioned, and with my daughter Sofia, and with the community of Centro Social 6 de Maio, that I rescue all this information that I show you. This is actually a beautiful book that shows a program that was made in the barrio with the local police, and it was a very nice program that unfortunately stopped. These are the image you can see through the sculpture. These are films. I only have stills of the films. So all this chain of materials and meanings that came to my hands, they always oscillate between beauty and violence. And in the process, I was a mediator. I see myself as a mediator, operating on several vectors writing a narrative with so many voices and building an archaeology of reconstruction of a disappearing memory. These are other places where the piece was shown. This is a special place for me because it's a church deactivated, without cult, but have all this image, all these people talking. So the silence of the sculpture in this space where we have all these people talking, it's very intense and dramatic. Just to finish, I want to tell you that the piece was donated by me to the Archaeological Museum of St. Tirso, of course, and cannot enter the commercial art world. And this was, since the beginning, something that I decided. Because I donated that piece to the museum, in exchange of my donation, the museum invited the community from the bairro 6 de Maio, that at that moment were more or less 40 people, to come from Lisbon in a bus to Santo Tirso Museum to see a show of where not only just this piece was shown, but a lot of pieces of my work, so I could do a visit to my work, explain my work, show the sculpture, and then at the end we did a beautiful lunch for everybody. And I think it was, the piece that got the most amazing payment was this. Thank you.
We are now continuing with Myelin, an American artist based in New York. Myelin is known for large-scale environment artworks, architectural works, and her memorable designs. A unique multidisciplinary career has resisted categories, boundaries, and borders. In her book, Boundaries, she writes, "I see myself existing between boundaries, a place where opposite meet, science and art and architecture, east and west. My work originates from a simple desire to make people aware of their surroundings." So
Thanks.
I'm going to do what everyone else did. Hi. I'm just going to go right into it. So in my sculptures, I have focused on the environment, generally trying to ground you right underneath what's below your feet that you might not notice. So I did a group show with Jenny Holzer and Ann Hamilton. It was 3 Ohio women artists, and we did it at the Wexner Center, and I just asked a question. How does a river overflow its banks? This is the Mississippi, Ohio, and the floodplain, of course, is in the lighter blue. So it was a temporary show. Do I point that way? Oops. Am I going backwards? I'm actually going backwards. Oh, wait, sorry, the arrow's the wrong way. There we go. So this was the first drawing. I took over the middle gallery, and this is, again, just a little sketch of how a river does overflow its banks. So it starts as tributaries, and then at some point, all those tributaries just blow up and flood. So by the time it hits the floor, it negates. So the river is in negation, and the other part is. So this is, again, it's in industrial glass marbles, and then it just broke. And the floods that are happening because of climate change throughout the Midwest in the springs are phenomenal, disastrous. So a lot of times I'm also bearing witness to climate change. Another piece, I'm going to talk about 2 artworks, and then I'm going to launch into my not-for-profit foundation, What is Missing? Third question, which is all about raising awareness about biodiversity loss, but linking it to how nature-based solutions can both save 2 birds with 1 tree. We can both reduce emissions by 50 to 150%, as well as save biodiversity. So I'll get into that. But first comes a piece that is both part of What is Missing and part of my work as an artist. It's called Ghost Forest. And I was invited in. Doesn't seem to be advancing.
No, it was.
There we go. To do a temporary work in Madison Square Park. It was going to be the spring of 2020, but COVID hit. We put it off for a whole year. And I decided to bring a forest killed by climate change to the middle of Manhattan. It required, actually, we thought it was 49 trees. When I finally counted them all in the end, it's always been 50, but we won't go into that. And 1 week in a cold, wintry, spring day, in comes 50 killed Atlantic cedar trees, victims of saltwater inundation, and I literally planted them in the middle of Manhattan. The trees, to me, each one was a private, quiet giant, and we put them in when there were no leaves on the trees in the park, and it bared witness because these totems stayed up for the course of 4 seasons, and we were supposed to take them out when the leaves started to drop in November, but of course with climate change, the leaves were still on the trees. But this just gives you an idea, and again, right after COVID, I was very aware of not trying to take over a park and not let you use it. So the place was created so there are pockets where maybe 2 or 3 people could sit, or other areas where 5 or 6 people could sit. Of course, the game was, how do I make this feel natural and not have trees line up? So with every tree I put in, I had to dance around and choose the next tree that would go next to it. And I was pleasantly surprised. I was a little afraid. It was right after COVID. Are people gonna be freaked out and depressed that I brought 50 dead trees to the middle of Manhattan? And I was really pleasantly surprised by how people engaged with it throughout the summer. For me, though, I tracked my entire carbon footprint and calculated we used about 5-6 tons of carbon, and we worked not just with the Madison Square Park Conservancy, but we invited in the Natural Areas Conservancy. They planted in the fall 1,000 trees and shrubs, which we calculated would offset our emissions in building the piece tenfold in the next 10 years. So that was sort of what I want to do with my works, as well as Madison Square Park had a major public programming, and I kicked it off with a whole program inviting people from the Nature Conservancy, people from Rodale Institute, people from the Perfect Earth Foundation. So the focus to me was, I don't want to just make you aware of what we're losing. Time's too short. We have very little time. What can we all do to help? What can you do? What can larger organizations do? So nature-based solutions, it's like a dying mantra in my head, is what I'm really focused on. And so I did start what I call my 5th and final memorial. It's called What is Missing. It exists like water wherever it's invited in. It has been in multiple sites, both temporary and some permanent. Ghost Forest is one of those iterations. But again, even the idea of what we're losing, we don't even know, because we're destroying their habitats so rapidly. So What is Missing is multi-sited, sites through science-based artworks, the 6th mass extinction of the species. But for me, and I worked with scientists, the first iteration was for the California Academy of Sciences. I made a promise to them because they said to me, whatever you do, you have to give people hope. So this is called the empty room. You go into a black box, you pick up one of these plexiglass optic plates, and you get to hold an animal or species place in your hands and learn about why it's disappearing. But as much it exists online as a virtual site, and we collect memories. So everyone in the audience owes me one thing, and that's a memory. And it isn't just something you remember disappearing or diminishing or coming back from the natural world, something your parents and your grandparents have talked to you about. Because the problem with forgetting and shifting baselines is, how can we protect something if we don't even realize it's missing? Or that you might not realize that a cod in the 1890s was bigger than a man. So that we know what we know, and everything that's come before us and been diminished is gone. So a lot of what I try to do, and what I believe art can do, is give us a new idea, reframe the problems we face. So we created timelines, there's about 1,000 of them, cities, rivers, species, do a deep dive. What is our emphasis? Like say a river, the River Thames, it's never been cleaner than in the last 400 years. So what we did was we chose to live where it was vibrant and abundant. We first pollute with sewage, then we pollute with industrial waste, and then we go, oh my God, what are we doing? We start legislating it. And time again, what these timelines show us is nature's resilient. If we protect it, if we legislate it, it comes back. So this is just an idea of what was in New York Harbor. I think one settler said lobsters were larger than a man, they were 6 feet tall, and then another scientist said, oh, Adrian, he always exaggerates. They were only 5 feet tall. But this is why, how can I make it humorous at times, but also make it personal? Tell us something from your childhood, or better yet, your grandparents' childhood. What do they remember that is no longer there? Make it personal. And then the website gets you into timelines. But what can I do maybe as an artist? I'm not here to try to compete with the great groups that are out there fighting on the front lines. I can showcase what they're all doing. But for me, what can we do is maybe show you a green future, a sustainable future. So we have on our website something called Mapping the Future. We actually just won 2 Webby Awards for the website, which I'm pretty excited about. But this is what I'm doing, and it's that Venn diagram. The major drivers of species loss on the right-hand side, the major drivers of climate change, and guess what's in the middle? 50% of all emissions caused by habitat degradation and loss. And the cheapest fix in the world are nature-based solutions. What does that mean? Reforming our ranching, reforming our agriculture, reforming our forestry, and protecting more lands. So I'm not going to go into it too much, but what if art can propose new ways of thinking? So I'll leave you with 2 thoughts. This is maybe what art can do. Can we get you to reframe the thought? How much space would 8 billion people take up if we all lived at the population density of Manhattan? If we could all fit into the state of New Mexico, or the country of Paraguay, Poland, Congo, Oman, or Vietnam. So again, people generally say, well, I don't want to live like a Manhattanite. But it's also, they also say another thing, that's it? So what if we could curb climate change? I sort of brought this up at Davos. Just to give you an idea, according to the Davos, according to the World Economic Forum, it would take 1.6 trillion annually to curb climate change. Guess what we spend that much on? Alcohol. We're having the biggest party on the planet, and we're doing it at our kids' expense and every other species on the planet. So when people say, oh, it's too much money, it's actually trivial what we're doing, and we don't even realize we're doing it. I'll give you one other thing, because we love showing the money trail. This is what it would take for nature-based solutions in order to save biodiversity and reduce emissions by a significant amount. And it's what we spend on tobacco every year. So thank you. I'm going to be done with that.
Yeah, thank you.
We're heading now to Diana. Diana Policarpo is a visual artist and composer working in visual and musical media, including drawing, video, sculpture, text, performance, and multi-channel sound installation. Policarpo investigates gender politics, economic structures, health, and interspecies relations through speculative transdisciplinary research. She creates performance and installations to examine experience and vulnerability and empowerment associated with acts of exposing oneself to the capitalistic world that Maya was talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, João, for inviting me and Art Embassies, and to be next to artists I love, Fernanda and Maya, and also congratulations to the artists in the previous panel who I admire. I think I'm just going to talk about some stories today. I don't have much time to show actual sound installations and films, but I have a selection of projects that, as João was saying, they are like closely related to health, to toxicity, to cure, poison, very specific resources, natural resources, but also some site-specific installations I produced in the last 3-4 years. So the first one, it's called Death Grip. Actually, this project and the next project were exhibited here at MAT. Death Grip was part of the EDP Foundation Prize in 2019, and it sort of it coincided with the period where I was developing a residency in India, but the filming and the most part of the process actually happened in Nepal. And this project sort of started also during the second cancer of my grandmother. And living in the biggest Nepalese community in Lisbon, I was also advised to look for a very special natural resource called cordyceps. You probably heard about it as something called like the zombie fungus or something like that. And I was interested in this sort of alien parasite, which is also a fungus, because I must say I'm very passionate about science fiction, so all the projects somehow rely in like feminist speculative fiction, but I also collaborate a lot with people who work in science, any sort of like science from biology to biohacking to chemistry. So to actually think about science fiction and in the writing, I usually invite people to give me support to get the science right in a way so I can sort of like develop the stories or the short stories from that. So this installation was shown just next door, and my idea was to combine 2 screens with digital animations. There's 18 sound channels around the room, which have lots of field recordings, a spoken word, narration of the story. And these volumes that you see on the floor, they were these bass bins somehow trying to bring this idea of place also in the landscape on Nepal, but to also like explore this relationship of fungus and precarity. And my idea was, like I did in other projects, was to really like follow and try to find ways to work with workers in Nepal, especially a group of women who were responsible to sort of like control the whole economy and the picking from the harvesting period to sales. So this natural resource, cordyceps, it's very well known to cure cancer. It's sold globally in health shops. If you see many medicine you can buy there has some sort of extract from cordyceps. So in the States, it's also like very well known now. But what really struck me was the fact that this resource is called the soft gold, and it's basically extinct at the moment. So I was trying to follow the changes in the landscape, the stories of people living there, because it's the main source of income in Nepal, but also like in the north of India, especially in the regions of the Himalayas. So I was very fortunate to have support to work with this group of women, and to also understand that there's many taboos around their lives, you know, like to mention like menstruation, or while workers, female workers are in the camps, they can't touch the fungus because it's seen as something impure. But actually, if you are in the camps and if they also live on sex work, this fungus can be exchanged as a currency. So there's like many facts that were like inspiring this story that is narrated in the installation. And I'm just going to show you some stills. Also, something interesting is that this resource is half plant, half animal. So it's very difficult to find it because you have to crawl on the ground. And actually, when the fungus grows, it mimics the shape of the grass. So it's, you know, it's very, very sort of like alien sort of like exchange between the parasite and the host, and develops this sort of like mind control. So I was interested in, also, you probably know Last of Us. So it's based on cordyceps. And this was also a diptych of 2 sculptures. I don't know if we can play the sound clip. I was just interested to show you this piece because I worked with a Canadian collective from Nanotopia, and the idea was to develop a kit, or a biosonification kit, which is a kind of a synth that you can cultivate the fungus in a petri dish, and then you can create sound from it. I think it's the other sound clip that says looking outward and inward. Can you help me there?
Needed tales of progress. Or
No,
ruin.
this is from the
Tell us
installation,
to
it's the
think
next.
about collaborative.
This is from the previous work. Should I do it? I don't know. It's just a sound, an audio file. Yeah. So there's a conversation between 2 kinds of fungi. Oh, it's playing, this is for the next project. How do you stop it? Thank you. Just the sound. Yeah, so this is an actual conversation. Right, you get the idea. Thank you so much. Okay, I wanted to move to the next installation, which is called Nets of Wi-Fi. It was a very long project, and due to the pandemic, as many of you experienced, it was very difficult to continue the field work with the previous project, with actually with Death Grip. So I was sort of already researching another kind of parasitic relationships, but also a different kind of a natural research, which is like, it grows on cereal plantations, and it's called ergo. It's very well known for being a kind of medicine, but it was also used for many centuries by midwives, and it was used to help people with uteruses during birth, but also to heal post-hemorrhagic problems, but it was also used as an abortifacient. So it was a kind of a knowledge and a kind of resource that I was interested to know a little bit more about. And what really struck me about this relationship between the plant and the human body when contaminated by this fungus is the fact that the reproductive system of the plant and the human, the people with uteruses reproductive system in this case, reacts in the same way. So it destroys the ovary in this case of the plant and affects the human ovaries in the same way. So I was again trying to combine these 2 different exchanges, biological processes. And I was still interested in this idea of labor and precarity and the subterranean world, and I did mention the other sculptures on the floor were vibrating with these bass bins in your body. In this case, it was a very much like a multimedia installation. It has also lots of sound channels, so there's different voices, human, animal voices, there are drawings, there are different videos. This piece is called also the Oracle. We had a big The Oracle piece today as well, where I chose different archetypes to tell stories of different relationships with ergo, with this fungus specifically. And for some of you who might know, it was the resource that was used by Hoffman to synthesize the LSD. So there were lots of people affected through the centuries just by eating like mixed fungus with the cereal, especially the rice. So you could eat bread and just suddenly start like having hallucinations and having different sort of effects. So the Oracle film talks a lot about how since medieval times people were accepting this state of permanent hallucination as a sort of result of like foods, right? Contaminated foods. And this piece I probably can show a little bit is the Cyanovan film was made in collaboration with a biohacker called Palapin. And I was focusing this work in the north of Portugal, and especially in the north regions and with Galicia. So I traveled to Galicia to work with this biohacker, which is also like creating a lot of radical gynecology workshops. And she drives a van, which is a sort of like mobile lab. And her community, it's also developing really interesting work, especially with the queer communities, like supporting hormone treatments, for example, with plants, or people with diabetes, creating some sort of like medicine from tobacco leaves. So there's very interesting work in biohacking at the moment. And this is also part of the installation. It's a triptych, which is a video that was made in collaboration with the Ancient Art Museum in Lisbon. I grew up with this painting in Lisbon, and suddenly I was learning that it was the biggest example of ergotism in society. So all these visions and the demons and the characters, there's a lot of like subliminal messages related to ergo. So maybe these are just some stills. And this is the triptych that opens. It's also it's like an animation, so maybe we can play just 1 minute of the Cyanovan protocol or the Bosch garden. You choose. Bosch garden? Okay, Bosch garden.
Astrologically speaking, this video is a fire sign. It is air and bones. Everything it touches is changed, often beyond recognition. Fire is the energy of change and transmutation. It circulates architectural structures, and it can be seen governing various organ systems, tissues, constitutional states, capital, and other dynamics within our bodies. Matter and mind sip and mingle with each other. These substances are themselves sites of rupture caused by hunger and contamination, where transformation of matter into energy is manifest. The ergo-alkaloids occupy an important...
I'll just move quickly forward for the last project, I think, because we are running out of time. Yeah, and as a last project, I wanted to show Ciguatera, which is a commission for TBA 21. It was a commission for the chapel of San Lorenzo during the Venice Biennale. And maybe you can check some materials online, but basically Ciguatera, it's a kind of a intoxication when we eat poisoned fish. So there was also like a desire to fly and develop work in Selvagens Islands in Portugal, which is a very complicated territory. I mean, it gives us a lot of territory, you know, like maritime territory, but the contamination, it's spreading a lot around this area. And I was working there, living in a military base for a few weeks to understand a little bit of the ecological problem there with toxicity, but to also learn that there was a lot of like this analogous relationship with Mars. So there was like, before we went there, me and my team, there was an astronaut being trained there for like training to Mars, but to also like look into different sort of microorganisms and new foods that could be taken in the next space mission. So there's a lot of screens embedded in these sculptures with different stories. And Ciguatera was known also to poison and kill colonizers. So, you know, it's a great weapon and a great fight back of nature. And I'm sorry I'm running out of time now,
Yeah.
but thank you so much.
So we're done with time, so I think the easiest way is just to go to the public and see if there's any question from you guys. Otherwise, I think we have to finish. Do we have 5 minutes? No. So if any other question from the public, otherwise, thank you so much.